Listen to the vibes.
The views and opinions of our guests may not necessarily reflect those of the host or the Vibes Broadcast Network. Listener discretion is advised.
Welcome, everyone, to another episode of Listen to the Vibes, and I am very blessed to have Mr. Jack O'Halloran here. And if you recognize him, he played Non in Superman and Superman 2, but also had a boxing career. And I understand you're an author, so I just want to get to know everything about you. So tell us a little bit about yourself.
Okay, it started out with football. When I left school, I had a lot of offers to play college ball, and I wound up going down to Western Kentucky because I kind of liked the school because it was an 8-to-1 ratio, girls to guys. they played in a pretty good conference, and they had a pretty good coach down there. So, but school was boring after a year, so I left. And I got grabbed by the Jets, the New York Jets, right away. But the problem was in those days, you couldn't play pro ball until your class graduated college. They should still have that rule in play, actually.
They should.
Because these guys come out too young and they get hurt. You know, it's just so they had like a farm team on the East Coast. And there was like a league that a lot of guys that had left school early, John Unitas, and a lot of people played in this thing until they were eligible to play in the pros. So the year that I was eligible to go in and play pro ball, the Eagles had a pretty good team, and a lot of friends of mine were playing down there. And I remember going to Eubank and said, I'd like to get out and give a shot in Philadelphia. And he said, well, you always have a home up here, so if you got to do what you got to do. But so I went down to Philly, and they sold the team in the midst. They were in the midst of selling the team to a kid by the name of Jerry. What was that kid's name? Good kid. Anyway, he bought the team and hired a guy named Joe Kuharich as a coach. And Kuharich traded a championship football team away in 3 months. He traded Jurgensen, McDonald to Washington for Norman Snead. And I mean, just some ludicrous trades. And Ali had just won the title. And I knew some people in Philadelphia from my father's world that controlled boxing. And I said, I can beat that guy. And they said, wow, what a great idea. So I wound up in the gym training to be a fighter. And I was a pretty good football player. I was like, when I was playing ball, I was about 280 and I ran a 4.6 40. So I moved around the field pretty good. So when I went to train, I went down to about 235 for 6 months, and I couldn't box amateur because there was another law in those days. If you were a pro, you were a pro, and you couldn't do both amateur and pro. Today, you can get away with that.
Yeah.
They play basketball. They do all this other stuff. So I started out in boxing, and I was 16-0, and I went to get a physical, and the guy said to me, "You're an acromegalic, and you shouldn't be fighting at all." I said, "What are you talking about?" So I had a tumor of the pituitary gland, which causes growth. It's if your body puts out 10% growth hormone, mine was putting out 150.
Oh my goodness.
And what it does, it depletes your body and it causes a lot of depression. And Andre the Giant, a few people, Richard Kiel, some other people had the disease. So I said, don't worry about it. He said, how are you going to be able to get up for it? I said, don't worry about it. But boxing was a day job for me. At night, I was involved in my father's world. And my father was a guy called Albert Anastasia, who ran a little company called Murder Incorporated. And the Anastasia family became the Gambino family when they assassinated my father in 1957 because he wouldn't go in the drug business.
Wow.
You've seen The Godfather when they went to Brando, and Brando said, if we touch it, my children will touch it, and it'll be the downfall of the families. And my father said that. And my father controlled all the harbors of America. So he said, you're not bringing that stuff in on my watch. We didn't sign up for that. And Genovese wanted it, and a few other people. And he was right. Albert was the glue of all the families. When Albert was assassinated, everything fell apart. and people started shooting each other, and greed for drug business and all the other things. So it just got worse and worse as years went on. But I was involved with Jimmy Hoffa, was a good friend of mine. So we were helping him with Teamsters and stuff and different strikes and stuff like that.
So where is he?
I actually know where he's at.
Do you?
And he's not buried. I'll guarantee you that right now. And he wasn't cremated either. But he's Jimmy was a good, dear friend, and Jimmy was his own worst enemy. I mean, Jimmy was a man's man. Jimmy Hoffa would never ask you to do what he couldn't do himself. He was that much of a. And when they put him away for $8,000, they claimed that he stole from the pension fund. There was no pension fund until Hoffa. Hoffa put the pension fund there. And if Jimmy Hoffa wanted something fixed in his house, he didn't have to go get contractors to do it. They would have lined up to do whatever he wanted because they loved him that much. And it wouldn't have cost him a dime. You understand? So the whole thing about him stealing $8,000 was the thing that the Kennedys spoke up, because the Teamsters had so much voting power, and they were afraid that he didn't want Jack Kennedy to be president, and they would have swung the vote around. Okay, so they got rid of Hoffa.
So the movies and all that stuff, is that overhyped?
Oh my God! So they just did The Irishman, and Frank Sheeran was supposed to have killed Hoffa, and he was supposed to have killed Joey Gallo. He didn't kill Hoffa, and he didn't kill Joey Gallo. They wrote a book about Frank Sheeran. He was from Philadelphia. I knew him well. They wrote a book about him called Paint Your Houses. And because he banged a couple people, he banged up, but he was a driver for Russell Buffalino. Russell Buffalino was a very serious don in Western Pennsylvania, and probably one of the most connected guys in Washington. And he drove him around, and Billy Buffalino was his lawyer, was Russell's brother, and he was the lawyer, and he was involved with them. And he might have whacked a guy here and whacked a guy there, but he never whacked Hoffa, and he never whacked Joey Gallo. That was all Hollywood puff shit. The Irishman. They did the movie The Irishman. Was fallacy. So they do that. Hollywood takes liberties when they do things. And the best thing they ever did was The Godfather. And they just did a series of The Offering. Was done pretty well. I knew Al Ruddy good. That was the making of The Godfather, and how it came together and all the complications they had. And it was a great series, actually. They did a great job with it. You know, there was only a couple buffalo areas that were foul size, but beside that, it was pretty good. You know, but they tell so many bad stories about who did this and who did that, and you know, and people buy into it because like you said, where's Hoffa? Everybody wants to know where Jimmy Hoffa is. So when they did The Irishman and they proclaimed that he had him shot, but that answered that. Well, it didn't answer the question because that's not the truth. But the truth is going to come out, and it'll come out in the next book that I'm doing.
Ooh, nice.
Jimmy was. So here's a funny story. Everybody's looking for Jimmy Hoffa. There was a wise guy in Chicago that gets locked up, and before he got locked up, his father had a gentleman farm outside of Chicago, about 30 acres. And this guy went out every year and tilled it over for him and turned the ground over and everything. His father was an older guy who couldn't get around too good. So now he goes to jail, and his father's farm is sitting there and nobody to go out and till it for him. So he tells the FBI, Hoffa's buried on my father's farm. And they went and they dug up the whole farm. They turned all the ground over for this guy looking for Hoffa, and they, of course, never found anything. And that's what the guy who sat in jail did. He sat in jail and laughed like hell. But that's how bad people were looking for. Everybody's always looking for an answer to something, you know. So Jimmy backed the wrong president, and when he was going to jail, he thought he was only going to go for a couple months and then they'd let him out. And he And when he went away, we talked to him from Boston on the phone and to say goodbye to him and, to tell him that, and Jimmy was this kind of guy. I did the crime, I'll do the time. Because he didn't think he was going to do any big time. And he wound up doing a few years. But they lined every Teamster truck all the way up to Lewisburg. While they took him up to put him up to Lewisburg, they're banging their horns saying hello to him as he went by. The country came to a standstill that day. Nothing moved. Every Teamster was out, and they lined the highways just to salute him as he went by to go into jail.
Wow.
So he gets out of jail. He made a bad deal. He wrote up a bad contract just to get out. He just wanted to get out. So when he came out, he wasn't supposed to touch the Teamsters for a couple of years, or I don't know. He had language in there that he wasn't allowed to do this, wasn't allowed to do that. And he came home and he went right into his office and he threw Fitzsimmons out. And he said, "This is my office. Get out. I'm taking the union back over." And he said, "Jimmy, you're going to get us all locked up. You're not allowed to be here. You signed an agreement not to be here. I don't want to hear that shit." He said, "This is my law. This is my union, and I'm home. Now I'm taking it back over." So Fitzsimmons was already in the thumb. They bombed a car next to his kids, scared the death out of him. So they had him on the thumb. And they never would have had Hoffa. So Hoffa's talking to New York on the phone, and they're telling him, "Jimmy, just calm down. Everything will work out. You just got home. Give it a chance. We'll work the agreement out. We'll get it. We'll fix everything." I don't want to hear that. He said, "I want my union, and I want it right now. And I don't want to hear anybody." He said, "When you guys asked for money from the Teamster Pension Fund for Vegas, I always gave it to you, and they paid every dime back. They never took a loan that they didn't pay back. They took $25 million for Caesar's Palace, and he put up for the pension fund, and they paid it right back." So he kept going back and forth, and the guy said to him, "Jimmy, you're on the telephone. Just let it calm down and just take care of it." And he turned around and said, "I'll go to the press." And the guy in New York hung up. And that was the end of Jimmy Hoffa. After that, he disappeared. And do I know where he's at? Yeah. But are we going to tell that today? No. But I will tell you, he's not holding any bridges up. He's not buried anywhere, and he wasn't creamed.
He's not holding up third base.
No, not any ball fields. Not anywhere. Anywhere it's going to be spectacular when they announce where he found them and shit. And his son now is running the Teamsters, which is good because that's where he belongs. But like I said, Jimmy was Jimmy. He was an amazing individual. So when you go back across the things that happened in those days, I was a kid, and I'll send you a copy of Family Legacy. We're getting ready to do a mini series, and then we're going to do a series because I got 2 more books going to come out. And I tell the truth about the Kennedy. I was in the Murchison house the night before Kennedy's assassination. There was a party there. They called it Egyptian Nights. The host was Hoover. There were 4 presidents there. McCoy was there, who ran all the banking from New York. And Meyer Lansky set it up for me to go on the premise that I was going to play for the Dallas Cowboys. That I would go down and do a tryout and play for the Dallas Cowboys. So I got to see all these people and to learn and to listen and to talk to a few of them. And it was an educational deal. And Johnson came back from meeting. Kennedy came into Fort Worth that night late. And Johnson came back about 11:30, 12 o'clock. And the whole group, the Bushes and everybody, they went into a room by themselves, and I left. And I was supposed to leave Dallas, and I stayed the next day, and I was out doing road work, and I ran into Johnny Roselli from Chicago. And he said, "What are you still doing here? You're supposed to leave." I said, I just hang around another day. He said, "You got to get out of this town, Jack. You're not supposed to be here." So it took them 4 months to reroute that route down Dealey Plaza. And Jack Kennedy was not going to live out his term as president because he was dying of Addison's disease, which is a deterioration have your spinal canal. He had syphilis and he had 2 other diseases. They used to shoot him up every day for pain. And his father would have rather seen him die the way he died than to die from a medical condition and put a mark on the family. And you might say, well, that's pretty cold-hearted. But look what he did to his own daughter, who he lobotomized, because she suffered from ADD and no doctor had any handle on that. And he was afraid that she was going to get up and jump on the table and dance and strip and shit like that, because ADD people do funny things. And he lobotomized her. She sat in an institution her whole life, looking out a window. That's pretty cold-hearted, I would think, you know?
Yeah,
So
no
Joe
kidding.
was kind of a very cold-hearted person, but you got to go back to the beginning with Joe Kennedy in the Depression years. Joe Kennedy, first of all, married Rose Fitzgerald. Honey Fitzgerald, Rose's father, was a gangster from Ireland, came to Boston and took over the whole harbor, dug it out, made it deeper to bring in different ships, because he controlled all the liquor from Europe. And he was a senator of Massachusetts, and he owned the Bank of Boston. And he was a powerful guy. And he made Joe Kennedy the youngest president of a bank in the history of banking in America, because Joe Kennedy was extremely smart, very clever guy, but also a very ruthless person. And in his Depression time, the guy that owned Fleischmann Liquor from Newark, New Jersey, and Joe Kennedy had a warehouse up in Canada, and he got all the booze from his father-in-law, and he was bootlegging down from Canada into America. Then he had a shipment of booze that was coming down that was to go to a group called the Purple Gang. I don't know if you ever heard of them, but look them up. The Purple Gang were a group of Jewish killers, and they were stone killers, and it was somebody you didn't play with. They were from Detroit. Joe Kennedy hijacked the liquor that they were supposed to get and sold it to somebody else for a bigger price. And they said, you're a dead man, sunshine. And he ran home to his father-in-law and he said, this is my problem. His father-in-law said, I cannot help you with those people. You really stepped on the wrong toes. The only guy that can help you is the Don of Chicago, which was Joe Esposito at the time. And he went to Chicago and sat down with him, and Esposito said, you know, kid, you're a really good earner. You go home to Boston. I'll take care of the Purple Gang, but you belong to me now. And they had him under thumb in Chicago. And the only money Joe Kennedy ever put into a building in America is a Mercantile building downtown Chicago. They made him build that.
Really?
Then in 1926, they went to him. There was a group out in, you can look this up, there's a place in Chicago called the Hamilton Club. It was like the New York Athletic Club. All the politicians, president, everybody hung out there. So they grabbed Joe Kennedy. First, they had sent him to Chicago, sent him out to Hollywood. And he if you look under the paperwork of RKO Studios, Joe Kennedy put together all the Jewish theater owners and created the first studio distribution deals. And he got in bed with the newspaper guy from Northern California, and he got in bed with a lot of people. And the Chicago mob controlled the film industry because they owned the cinematographers. They owned that union. Joe Kennedy then was taken back to Chicago in 1926. They said, there's something that we want you to do for us. And he said, what do you want me to do? And he was very clever bank-wise. So he stole $5 million from Pathé Newsreel in broad daylight. Nobody ever saw it, how he took it. And they said, that's quite clever. He said, we really like that. Now, this is what we really want you to do. After World War I, America got into war-bearing materials and building them and getting involved in war, preparing for any other war that was going to come. And they took a lot of jobs from Europe because they started building things and doing things, and boom. So Europe was very angry because they were the underwriters of America. They put all the money into the banks in the beginning that underwrote the country. And they had Joe Kennedy create what you call a short sell. I don't know if you know what that is.
No, I
A
don't.
short sell in the stock market where they sell short and collapse different stocks.
Oh, okay. Okay.
And then they
Gotcha.
come back the next day and they build it back up and they take it book. So they had him create this short sell that was aimed at 30 companies in Europe that were, because they wanted to quell Europe jumping down their throats asking for money. One of the companies was owned by the Rothschilds and was run by Blackjack Bouvier, who was Jackie Kennedy's father. Yeah.
Oh, I did not know that.
And when they bankrupt that company, Blackjack Bouvier drank himself to death. Jackie Kennedy's mother made a vow that she would get even with the Kennedys and get her money back. And she groomed her daughter to marry Jack Kennedy.
Wow.
So he does this short sell put it all together. And by 1928, going into 29, he puts this short sell in play, and it works extremely well. The first week, they just raped a lot of companies in Europe. And they took off for the weekend, and they were coming back to finish the following Monday, and the country panicked because the stock market was going crazy, and it caused the crash. They didn't intentionally want the crash, but it caused the crash, and it made them more money. And after the crash was over and subsided, Roosevelt said to Kennedy, "Boy, kid, you did a hell of a job with that. Now we want you to run the SEC and rewrite the laws," because they knew Europe had to reinvest back into America to get their money back.
Mm-hmm.
And Joe Kennedy rewrote the SEC laws, became head of the SEC, and did a great job. In 1935, the president said, "Boy, man, you did a fantastic job. Now we're going to make you ambassador to England." So now we're 1935. America's not in the war yet. The war's brewing in Europe because England and Germany's starting to run over countries, and Hitler's jumping up and down. And Joe Kennedy is ambassador to Europe. And when he was going over there, some people from Chicago grabbed him, sat him down, and said, "We want to tie up some strings over there, and you're just the guy that's going to do it for us, being ambassador to England."
Mm-hmm.
So he sits down with the Shah of Iran, who was a gangster, and they create a team where they're selling arms to Germany, because Germany's buying like crazy. And Joe Kennedy doesn't think he's doing anything wrong because America's not in the war. And they get in bed with a guy named Khashoggi, and they're financing and selling arms and all this stuff for Germany and making a lot of money. And England turns around and says to Joe Kennedy, "Hey, you're aiding our enemy." And they threw him out of England. When he came home, nobody said why he was thrown out of England, because the Gore family owned the newspapers in the East Coast, and they were from Indiana, and Randolph Hearst had the West Coast, and they never printed anything derogatory. There was no television, and the radio stations were owned by the Murchison family in Texas. So nobody ever stated why Joe Kennedy was thrown out of England. He just came home as Ambassador Joe Kennedy. So he turned around and he said, "I'm going to make my son, Joe Jr., President of the United States." So his son was a war hero. He was a pilot. He was a big time guy.
Mm-hmm.
And the bankers of Geneva put together a deal where they were building a plane that was going to be like a kamikaze plane to fly into the munition factories of Germany to end the war. And they talked Joe Kennedy into test piloting the plane. They wanted to make sure that it would go the right direction, all that. So he was supposed to be out of the service in 2 weeks. And they talked him into test piloting his plane. And being the crack pilot that he was, he jumped at the opportunity, jumps in the plane, poof, plane explodes, he dies. A week later, they scrap the whole deal. Son number one is dead. Boom. Son number two, now he's going to make Jack president. Meyer Lansky stands up in New York with some people and says, "What are we going to do with Richard Nixon? We own Nixon. Why? What do we need Kennedy for?"
Mm-hmm.
Giancana says, well, we got Kennedy in Chicago, and his father promises us both of his son's ears if we help him become president. So they got behind Jack Kennedy. Meyer Lansky said, well, what are you going to do with that, with Bobby? Bobby was already a thorn in people's side. And they said, oh, Bobby's going to be put over in Ireland as ambassador to Ireland. Going to get him out of the country. Everybody's okay. Now Jack comes to California for the nomination. Very wealthy people in Texas put a big bag of money together, and they go out and give it to Joe Kennedy for Johnson to run as vice president. He takes the money, Johnson's running as vice president. Joe Kennedy assures them that he's got the electoral votes all put in place and everything. Tells Giancana that. 2 days into the nomination, he calls Giancana. He says, I think we got a problem. We don't have the electoral votes we thought we had, and we may not get this nomination. So Giancana reaches around, and for the first time, the state of Illinois goes Democrat, and 2 other states go Democrat. And after the 3rd day, Joe Kennedy calls again, and he says, well, I think we still got a bit of a problem. And there was only 1 state that had enough electoral votes. And it was a little state, but it held a lot of electoral votes because of the coal mining and everything in West Virginia. And Giancana gets on the phone. They talk to the Cellini family and the Meyer, who own casinos all in through West Virginia. And they excuse some debt. And West Virginia raises their hand. And the electoral votes go to Kennedy. Kennedy gets nominated for presidency. Wow. Now he's running for presidency. And it was a neck and neck race. If you ever looked at history, it was very close with Nixon, blah, 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 back and forth. Now they just had all this jazz in this last election, right? About the ballots and all that stuff and problems with the ballots.
Right.
When Kennedy was running for president, I know for a fact that there were 3 sections of Illinois that people voted 20 times and they were dead.
Wow.
Did you hear what I said?
Yeah, I heard you.
He won by a very thin margin. So if it wasn't for Giancana, he doesn't become president. So now he becomes president of the United States. And his father takes, grabs and whispers in his ear. He says, make your brother attorney general. So he double-crossed everybody, and Bobby becomes Attorney General of the United States. Now, Jack turns around, and his father says to Bobby, put all my good friends in jail. So Bobby Kennedy went after Giancana, went after everybody. All of a sudden, he's after the mafia. He's after everybody.
And that's when didn't Bobby and Hoffa have kind of a
well, he went after the Teamsters. He went after Hoffa.
Right.
I was with Hoffa when he was we were in Vegas, and
wow.
Jimmy was sitting at a table, and Bobby walked up and Jimmy said, people got in front of Hoffa and told Bobby to go away. And Hoffa said, no, let the little punk come in here and talk to me. And Bobby Kennedy looked at him. He said, I'm going to put you away. And Hoffa said, listen, you little shit, just get out of my face. You know what? Just go home and do whatever you do at home. Stay away from me. So he went seriously after Hoffa. And that's when they did the $8,000 that he stole from the pension fund, which is all farce. It was all bogus. And Bobby went after Giancana. He went after a lot of people. And Albert wasn't around. My father wasn't around to hold the glue together. And everybody was running around scrambling because all this bull was going on. And they put Hoffa away. And that took care of the Teamster vote. And then they went after this guy and went after that guy. And they would, things started to change drastically. And when Jack Kennedy, it took them, Bobby Kennedy was Jack's second skin his whole career. And when they put together the Dealey Plaza thing, where he was going to Texas. He's in an open car driving down Dealey Plaza with the Bird Building, which was a big book depository. All the windows are open, people walking around. People get off the train, they were coming over the bridge. Woody Harrelson's father was a hitman from New Orleans, and he was one of the Pobos that they locked up when they were coming over the bridge. There were 13 shots fired at Dealey Plaza that day.
Wow.
And Jack Kennedy.
I was going to ask you, did you see the footage where they slowed it down and then they actually zoomed in and you could see the driver turn around and shoot him?
I was going to tell you about that.
Yeah. Well, I'm sorry, I blew that, didn't I?
No, the first footage that was done, the footage was done by when the Brooder held the camera, took the footage, 28 seconds worth. The Brooder suffered from vertigo, never held the camera in his hands before. Two women were holding his legs because they had him up high enough so he could see everything. And he never took his finger off the button while all the bullets are flying around. And the film was sold to Life magazine for $150,000 before it was ever shot. And no one saw it for almost a year. And when they saw it, there were 8 frames taken out of it. And the 8 frames included the driver turning and shooting Kennedy. The first version of the film didn't show that. You understand?
Yes, sir.
But I had a copy of the first version. I had a copy of it. I saw it.
No way.
And then the FBI, all of a sudden, years later, they knew that copy was around. They knew there were copies around. So they all of a sudden say, oh, we're going to show you the real footage. And it then actually shows the driver turn to his and just shoot Kennedy the third time. So here's the deal. They sold the one bullet theory. Lee Harvey Oswald was up in a window and took a shot with a man with a mail order rifle at Kennedy and blew. Now, here's the fun part. Kennedy gets shot the first time in the throat. That came from Johnny Roselli, who was into a cauldron on the side of the street. You see Kennedy grab his throat. The first guy that got shot was actually Connolly. Connolly fell. Jack Kennedy fell on top of him. Then he got shot in his lower back, and they never talked about that for 10 years. And then the last shot that the driver took, you see Kennedy fly backwards, and the back of his head comes out. So say to yourself, if Oswald is behind him up in the window, how does he shoot him to make the back of his head come out?
Right,
Okay?
right.
Now, there's a prison right across from the Bird Building. And these guys are standing there in the windows looking up at the window where Oswald was supposed to be. And there's 3 guys there, 2 dark complected guys, Cubans, and 1 white guy. Now, I don't know if you know anything about rifles or guns or anything.
A little bit.
You take a marksman who's going to make a shot of 1,000 feet, and you have a moving car on a decline. The wind derelish in Dealey Plaza was so bad that the microphones on the police mics, no one could hear anybody.
Mm-hmm.
And you had signs and trees. So these are all variables that you have to take into consideration. Yeah.
Right.
Now, the other thing is, you're a sniper, your pulse is in your finger. So you've got to arrest your heart to 60 or below because your pulse is in your finger. Now, you're going to take 3 shots in 28 seconds with a bolt action gun. It's never happening in God's world. And with any accuracy, forget about it. All they did was shoot 3 times and make a noise. That's all. And Oswald wasn't even in the building. He had already left. And he was a patsy from day one. Oh, Lee Harvey Oswald, his mother was a hooker in New Orleans.
Wow.
So he was connected to New Orleans. He thought he was going to be a spy in America because he had him working for the naval intelligence. There was bars in New Orleans and Dallas, and there were private clubs, and Army, naval, and military officials, high-ranking guys used to hang out in these certain clubs that had gay fashions to them. There were gay people there. And Oswald was dressed up like and he was mic'd, and he had conversations. So he thought he was going to become this great. There was a series, I Led 3 Lives, on television, a spy, counter spy. And Oswald thought he was going to be one of them. Zapruder and Murchison were two guys that came from Russia, and they were funded by Lansky and sent to New Orleans when they were in the garment district. And Murchison was engaged to Jackie Kennedy's aunt. Zapruder and Murchison went down to Texas, and they taught Harvey Oswald Russian. And he married a KGB girl, and he went to Russia. And he couldn't keep his mouth shut. Every time they moved him from one apartment to the next, they kept taping all of his conversations, and he had diarrhea of the lip and didn't know what he was talking about, and they threw him out of Russia. So now he comes home, and he's a throwaway. What are you going to do with him? So they make him a patsy for the assassination.
Right.
And he gets caught and they say that he's the one who shot President Kennedy, the one bullet theory, okay?
Mm-hmm.
They take him and they lock him up. And they're questioning him. Now, this guy's supposed to have shot the President of the United States. They did not take one note. They did not record one conversation. And when you see him come out into the garage, and there's a captain of the police that's beside him, he steps away from Oswald, and Ruby comes up and shoots him.
Shot him. Wow.
Right? First of all, how did Ruby get into the garage with a gun? Right?
Mm-hmm.
Now, Jack Ruby was from Chicago. He was a numbers writer, blah, 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 blah. They sent him down to Texas, and he opened up a club down there, and he became a gun runner into Cuba for people from America. Now, he's got this club and all this other jazz, and they lock him up. And they lock him up because he shoots Lee Harvey Oswald. Now, the Warren Commission is being put together, and they go in to talk to Jack Ruby. And Jack Ruby says, "You guys can't talk to me here. You've got to get me out of Texas. This is not a safe place to talk to me." "Oh, well, that's bullshit. So I guess you want me to tell you about Chicago." "No, we don't care about Chicago." "Why were you they hammering stupid questions at him?"
Right.
6 months later, he's a dead man because somebody took a needle from Tulane University, shot him up with cancer. He was never sick a day in his life before. All of a sudden, he dies of cancer in jail.
Wow.
End of Jack Ruby. End of Lee Harvey Oswald. The Warren Commission comes out and they sell it to everybody. Everybody buys the one bullet theory. They believe that Kennedy was actually shot by Lee Harvey Oswald, that the bullet went through Connolly's wrist and into Kennedy. Now, how the hell does that happen when Connolly got shot first and Kennedy falls on top of him because he got shot in the throat? And when they did the autopsy, they said, "Oh, he didn't get shot in the throat. That was a hole from the tracheotomy they tried to pull." Now, they claim now that they have Kennedy's brain intact down in the museum. Now, how could he have his brain intact when it blew out the back of his head?
I was fixed to say, if it got blown up, there's no way.
You understand? Right. And poor Jackie, she's trying to get out of the car, and they're saying, well, she was trying to scrape up Brendan's brains, but she tried to get out of the car because she thought they were going to kill her next.
Right.
And the Secret Service guys, if you ever watch the Zapruder footage, they peeled away from that car, and they had to run back up to it when the shots were starting to fire. They didn't want to be beside the car when the bullets were flying around. You understand?
Right.
So when they got up to the car and the guy grabbed Jackie as she was coming out and pulled her down and whispered in her ear, "If you say one word about what you've just seen happen, we'll kill your kids."
Jeez.
And she never said a word, but she kept a diary. And her son, who owned G Magazine when he grew up, his mother passed away, he got a hold of her diary, and he was coming to Hollywood to make a movie. And he was taking a plane trip with his girlfriend. They were both stoned out of their minds in cocaine. They showed up 2 hours late. He wasn't checked out on instruments. He shouldn't have been flying that plane. And it was in a storm. And the plane was micked. Plane blows up. Boom. Jack Kennedy Jr. is dead.
Dang.
Now you have Joe Kennedy, the older son, dead. Jack Kennedy dead. Bobby gets shot. Now the kid's dead. And the history of story. You
And
understand?
you've been holding on to this for all these years, and you
Yeah. So I wrote a book about 10 years ago, and I said, you know what? It's time to tell the truth about what the hell is going on, and what went on in the whole 9 yards. And it's every 10 years they come out with new stuff on the Kennedy assassination.
right.
And now they're fully admitting that what you call made the JFK movie with Kevin Costner, and
Yeah.
came close to telling the truth about the Kennedy deal. And he now has come back out with another documentary stating that the whole one bullet theory was bullshit, and showed how the bullets came out the back of his head. How could they be shooting him from the back when the bullets came out? You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Now
Yeah.
the truth. And the guy, the driver, Greer himself, on his deathbed, did a confession on his deathbed that he shot Jack Kennedy.
Wow.
And no one ever divulged that. They hid everything. Everything's been covered over. Now it keeps coming out little by little by little by little. But it's so many years, who gives a shit?
Right.
You know what
Well,
I'm saying? People have
history
been so
buffs like
brainwashed.
us.
People have been so brainwashed that they just glasses right over. Understand? So
Right.
it's time to put together a film that people will look at that tells the truth. You agree?
I definitely agree. I would watch that in a heartbeat.
Well, we already know that's going to happen. So we had so much material. We were going to do a film. We said, you know what? Let's do a miniseries, and then we'll turn it into a series. And I'll do a book from the Kennedy assassination to Nixon's impeachment, and tell the truth about that. And then we'll go to the next era and bring everybody up to date on all the bullshit that's gone on. And we're unfortunately, like, I put on Facebook every once in a while, throw a thing up saying, Americans, please take our country back.
Yeah.
Do yourself a favor. Take our country back. I mean, when the whole voting process happened with this Biden bullshit, and I mean, can you imagine Biden falls down, dies? Now you got her as president. If she dies, now you got Pelosi as president. That's frightening. I mean, that's
I
actually
agree.
scary.
I agree.
That's actually scary. So, I just pray to God that the country wakes up and just stands up like it should and takes our country back.
Yeah, I agree. I agree.
So that's part of my history there. Then I go from boxing. I wound up, I was a world ranked fighter for about 8 years, and I'm in the Hall of Fame of Los Angeles, of California and Pennsylvania and New Jersey, and I think New England, a couple other places. And I went into the movie business, but they came to me to do a couple films while I was boxing. And one of my, Steve McQueen did the Thomas Crown Affair up in Boston back in the 60s. And we took care of him, looked after him. And he and I became really good friends. And he said, I'm doing this movie. I want you to come down. I'm going to put you in the movie. You got to come back to Hollywood, man. We'll have a ball. We'll just have, he was a good, I mean, Steve was crazy. But he was like a street kid, you understand?
Mm-hmm.
And we had a lot of fun. And I said, nah, man, I'm undefeated as a fighter, and I don't think I'm ready for that world. It's not my cup of tea. You got to do this. You got to do this. Then he did a picture called Towering Inferno, and his name was Captain O'Halloran. He called me on the phone. He said, how you like your name up in the screen, man? Isn't that kind of cool? And then in 1968, 9, I knocked out Manuel Ramos, who was number 2 in the world. And I'm looking to fight Ali. And they put together a deal with Eddie Foy and Raymond Patriarca, who was the head of organized crime in New England. And he put a deal together to get me off the street to do The Great White Hope with James Earl Jones. It was a boxing movie. And they flew me out to meet the producer and all. And the guy said, well, I thought you just came in to sign the contract. I said, sign the contract for what? He said, we're doing this movie and I want you to play Jess Willard. And this is it's going to be, and it was the biggest movie in Hollywood at the time. And we're going to take you to Spain for 6 months and we're going to pay you $1,500 a month, $1,500 a week. I said, $1,500 a week. I said, I give that away in tips. So what are you giving me? What are you paying me? I'm looking to fight Ali for the title, and you want me to leave the country for 6 months to go do a movie? I don't think so.
Right.
He said, I thought this was all fixed. You were supposed to just sign a contract. And Eddie Foy was scared shitless. He said, oh my God. I went out, when I left the room, he said, oh, Raymond's going to be here. I said, I'll take care of Raymond. Don't worry about it. Boom. So when Queen called me on the phone, what do we got to do to get you to come to Hollywood, Bob? And I said, yeah. So when I retired from boxing, they offered me a film, Farewell, My Lovely, with Robert Mitchum. And I had an agent down in San Diego. I was California heavyweight champion. I was doing a lot of commercials and stuff. And she was my agent. She called me on the phone. She said, they want you to do a movie with Robert Mitchum, and I believe you should do it. I think you should do it. So I said, well, what do I got to do? And I got to go up to New York and meet this director. And I go up and meet the guy, and he says, you're the guy. And I said, yeah, right. And so they fly me out to California to take a screen test with Harry Dean Stanton and a few other people. And Mitchum sees the screen test. He says, it's either that kid or I don't do the movie.
Mm-hmm.
And he and I became like father and son. He was like my mentor, and he just walked me through. And Farewell, My Lovely, if you've never seen it, you should look at it. It's a great film, really a good film. And that was the first mistake I made in Hollywood. Mitchum arranged for me to go and see Johnny Carson, and I met him at the Polo Lounge. And he said, you come on my show, I'm going to get you nominated for supporting actor. And I said, I sat there and I looked at him and I said, but your show is live, isn't it? He said, yeah, they weren't taping shows, then they did them live. Mm-hmm. And I said, I think I got a problem. He said, well, what's the problem? I said, well, I'm going to come on your show and you're going to ask me about my father and I'm going to ask you where the men's room's at. He said, you would get up and leave? And I said, yeah. I said, I don't like people talking about my father. I don't talk about my father. I said, yeah, no. He said, well, we'll arrange the questions. We won't do that. And I said, John, you are the hottest reporting guy in Hollywood. Right. You have Albert Anastasia's son on your set, and you're not going to ask me about my father when nobody has ever answered the true questions about Albert Anastasia. And he said, no, but I said, I appreciate the offer. Thank you very kindly. Have a nice day. Mitchum screamed, what are you crazy? He said, Hollywood loves that shit. Man, they would have eaten that up. Nobody would have believed any of it. They'd have just thought it was craziness. I said, you and your big mouth. But I should have done the show. It would have, he's right. They eat stuff like that up, but I just didn't want to, some things statute of limitations don't cover, you know what I mean? So,
yeah, I know that.
Just, so I just, went through my life and did Farewell and then King Kong and had a very successful career in the film industry. And then we did the Superman movies and they made us iconic actors and the films were that good,
Yeah.
So,
and you didn't have to memorize a lot of lines for those movies, did you?
Well, for Superman, when I was doing a picture of March or Die down in Spain with Hackman, Catherine Deneuve, and a whole bunch of people. Mm-hmm. And they flew us up to London, Hackman and I, for the Superman deal. And I met Donner. And Donner said to me, well, we want you to play this role. And I said, yeah, I read the script. And I said, yeah. He said, what do you think about playing a deaf, dumb mute like this? And the character Non, had been a brilliant scientist that they lobotomized because of his involvement with Zod. Mm-hmm. And before they put him in prison. And I said, you know, I embraced that. I want to do a character like that. He said, what do you mean? I said, well, Jackie Gleason was a good friend of mine, and he did a picture called Gigo, where he played a deaf, dumb mute. He won an Oscar. I said, and if I ever get a chance to play a character using facial expressions and body language, I would embrace it. And this character is perfect because Saad is a vicious general.
Yep.
Sarah was a man eater. Somebody had to relate to the kids because it was a children's movie. I said, so I want to play this big guy like a child, learning how to work his eyes and learning how to get his powers together. And Donner said, wow, what a great idea. And that's what I did.
And you
And
still scared the crap out of me.
You know, I tell you, see what you just said? I'll tell you what, I remember the first Comic-Con I ever went to?
Uh-huh.
And the guy come up to me and said, my God, you can talk? I said, wow, I must have done a pretty good job in the film. He said, your character scared the hell out of me, but I loved your character because you related like a child, you know? So I had so many people that loved the character Non because of the childness of it, you know?
Yeah.
So it seemed worked out pretty good, you know?
It's
too
still
shabby.
frightening though. For an 8-year-old kid, that's scary.
Well, I've had a few kids come to me and say, boy, you scared the hell out of me, but I loved your character, my God.
Yeah.
You
You
know,
still
so
do
it's
cons?
Sorry? Yeah,
You-
in fact, I'm getting ready to go to Orlando the 19th of August.
Oh,
The
cool.
weekend of the 19th to the 21st. We're having this big horror thing down there. And I'm just getting ready to do a picture in Nevada called Red River, which is a great horror picture with a Faust twist. Doesn't have all that blood killing goriness like, you know, most horror pictures. This has a very neat Faust twist. The script's kind of very good. I like it. So we're going to do that up in Nevada. So we're going down and do this Comic-Con. And I just did a couple, one in Detroit for Superman Foundation. And the Comic-Cons are coming back because of this pandemic shit, slowing down a little bit.
Yeah.
So we used to do like 4 or 5 a year. Now they're going back again. So they're wanting us to go to Australia, and then they want us to go to Dubai. And, you know, they're iconic films that will never die.
Oh yeah.
And I've done a couple films. King Kong is a hell of a film. And Dragnet was a great movie with Dan Aykroyd, Tom Hanks.
I remember that movie too.
Hero and the Terror with Chuck Norris was a good movie. And I did a great picture that they really didn't distribute properly. It was called The Baltimore Bullet with Jimmy Coburn and Omar Sharif. And Bruce Boxleitner's first picture. About
Really?
shooting 9-ball. They shot the 9-ball tournament at MGM then. And Sharif was, what a brilliant guy. God, I loved him. Omar's a terrific guy.
Oh yeah.
I was very lucky in my career. I worked with Brando and, you know, Hackman and Mitchum and Coburn and, you know, a bunch of people. Still not over. Got still kicking around.
And you're still going at it and
Yeah.
writing books and making TV series and all kinds of stuff.
We're building a studio out in Nevada, 4 million square foot studio that's going to house every bit of entertainment under one roof for the very first time. And
Wow.
we're putting a smart city right next to it that'll house 30,000 people, all employees of the studio. And we're giving them a 7-year work contract. And they only have 15 minutes to go to work instead of 2 hours to drive each way, you know.
Right.
So it's cost effective all the way across the board. It's going to be we're just getting ready to break ground, hopefully in the next 60 days.
That's incredible. Everything you've done is incredible.
We're working pretty hard on it, but you know, it's good. We're going to have a lot of fun.
And you made my job real easy. I didn't have to do anything.
Oh, you asked me to tell you something, so I gave you the
Hey,
story of my life there.
perfect. Hey, if all my interviews were like this, I just had to sit here and look pretty.
You live in Austin, Texas, you know. I was telling you about George and Herman Brown, right?
Mm-hmm.
They were Brown Root. You must have heard of Brown Root,
I
which is now
actually,
Halliburton,
I
right?
used to work for Brown Root.
Well, Brown Root was George and Herman Brown. I knew them both well. And Herman lived down in Austin, Texas. And there was a guy in Austin, Texas, who had the power of the pen for federal contracts. So George and Herman Brown, how they made their money was Houston Harbor. After World War I in the 30s, the Houston Harbor, they took up and they built destroyers and built ships for the military.
Mm-hmm.
And by the end of 1937, they had like $950 million. It became pretty wealthy guys overnight. And then all the naval army bases they built. They got the contracts, all the federal buildings, all the bridges they built. That Brown Root became a huge company and then turned into Halliburton.
And go
Then
all
you
over
had
the world.
H.L. Hunt was the head of the 4-H club. And he'd come watch me fight. And I used to sit down next to him and have a chat with him. And he was a funny old guy, man. He wore 10-year-old suits. He brown bagged his lunch, drove an old car. And I whispered, he whispered in my ear, he got close to me, he said, "Son, you do realize you're talking to one of the wealthiest men in the world, don't you?" He was a kid from Chicago that left Chicago, went to LA. He had a third grade education, but he was a card shark. And he went to Texas and he won all the oil rights in the fields down there, playing cards. That's where he got started.
Wow. I didn't know that.
Yeah, H.L. Hunt. And he was he was a good guy, boy. I wish he was around today, actually.
Where I
George Herman.
Where I was born and raised is where Exxon is at, which is a little town called Baytown. And if you remember the Hellfighters with John Wayne, that was filmed. It's called Pelly, but Baytown, Goose Creek, and Pelly, they're all part of the same city. So that's part of our claim to fame down there, and the home of Gary Busey.
Gary, what a guy! Jeez, what a fun guy! Gary was crazy as hell.
That's where he's from.
There's a kid I had a dear friend in Dallas, the Bickers family. They were the collectors for casinos of Vegas.
Oh wow!
Mickey Bicker's still there. He's getting old right now. Mickey's a fun guy. He's a trip. But he was extremely close with the Browns, with Brown Root. But Texas was a real locked-in state at one time, boy. I mean, it was it was one of the most boring drives in the world to drive from Dallas down to the end, down to the end of Texas, man. You're lucky if you saw a couple anthills. It was a crazy. And I remember Houston when I boxed down in Houston in late '60s and early '70s.
Mm-hmm.
The Sheraton Hotel was the biggest hotel down there, and I think that they used to have the hookers that try. So whoever picked you up was the hookers or the mosquitoes. The mosquitoes were huge, man, and that huge sky Houston had. Houston had this huge. Now it's all built up. It's just like
you're not lying. Buildings and all kinds of junk down there.
Everything down. And San Antonio's gotten built up. And Austin's pretty much kept its cleverness about it, but
they're building a lot more homes and apartments and stuff.
Well, a lot of people are moving to Texas because it's a tax state. It's a great place to live.
Oh yeah.
But you sure as hell don't want to get caught up in hurricanes down there at the bottom of the state.
Not around Houston. That's why I like living up here in Austin. It'll all dissipate by the time it gets here.
Pretty much watered down, huh?
To say the least. But yeah, I love Texas. I love how we take care of ourselves here. We take care of our neighbors, and
you're 100% true. I have a lot of good friends in Texas, and I damn near moved to Houston a couple times. George Foreman said, "Man, you got to go down, and you should come down to Houston." I said, "George, how come you have 8 kids and they're all named George? I said,
I know
so
that
I
story.
can't forget, so I don't forget their names.
I actually know where George lives.
George is a good kid. George
Yeah,
and I had a little tuss up in Madison Square Garden.
yeah, you fought him. You fought Ken Norton.
And Norton, I'm fighting Norton. I tell you, they called me a week before the fight. So I go
Right.
out to San Diego and I'm in the gym, blah, 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 blah. And I'm fighting Norton and I beat the hell out of him. In the 9th round, I mean, he was cut over both eyes. The 9th round, we're standing toe to toe, and the crowd is up on the chairs screaming so loud that when they rang the bell, you couldn't hear it. So they rang the bell 3 times, and finally the referee got in between us and separated us. And I was going back to my corner, and Norton ran across the ring and hit me behind the head and drove me into the ring post. And Joey Amos, who was the commissioner, was sitting in my corner. And he jumped up into the corner and he said, you know, you can't continue. You just won the fight on a foul. And like an ass, I should have sat there because he was owned by 2 very wealthy billionaires. They were looking to make him an ally. And I got so angry. I said, stop the fight. I said, I'm going to kill this guy. Are you crazy? And I went out in the middle of the 10th round and said to myself, are you nuts? What am I doing here? And they stole the decision. So, but I won the town. So I stayed there and won the California, knocked out a half dozen guys. And I fought a guy, Henry Clark, that nobody wanted to fight. And I took the California state title away from him. And then I was signed to fight Ali. And the reason one of the guys I was knocking out, I got a phone call from Ali. He and I are pretty good friends. He called me on the phone. He said, you got to do me a favor. I said, yeah, I'll do you a favor. I said, sign a contract, book, and and we'll get it on. He said, we'll work it out. He said, but you're fighting my brother Rockman. I said, Rockman Ali is your brother? He said, yeah. I said, I better go in the gym a couple of days. So he said, you got to get him out of boxing for me. So I knocked him out, and he never fought again. I mean, his brother was a Muslim before he was a Muslim.
Really?
And I hit it in the 9th round. I knocked him flat out. I went back in the dressing room to make sure he was okay. And he looked at me and he said, my God, you hit hard. I said, God, you're a Muslim, man. What do you know about God?
You made him a believer that night, right?
Yeah. So Ali and I made a deal that he was going to come to San Diego and he and I were going to fight for the title. And we had an agreement. We were giving him 40% of the deal. And the 2 guys that owned Norton, one of them, Bob Byron and Art Rifkin. Byron owned La Jolla. He built Scripps. And Rifkin owned Coca-Cola down in San Diego and a bunch of other stuff. And they went to Chicago with a bag full of money and gave it to Herbert Muhammad. And all of a sudden, Ali was fighting Norton. And he called me on the phone almost crying. He said, I don't know how to tell you this, man. Because we had a contract. We were ready to sign a deal to go to fight.
Right.
But I have to fight Norton. I said, few choice words. But we were supposed to fight a couple times. And then I fought a guy, Alvin Blue Lewis in Detroit, who had won 13 rounds with Ali in Ireland. And he came home and he beat Ernie Terrell and he beat another guy. And they called me on the phone one day and they said, you want to fight this guy, Alvin Blue Lewis, in Detroit? And I said, when? He said, in about 7 days. They send me a ticket. Jack, you'll take the fight. I said, can I get a license? Because they just taken my license in California because of what they thought I was involved in an organized crime thing. But it was all bullshit. But they said, yeah, we'll give you a license. So I go to Detroit and I beat this guy to death. Then I go up to Ali's camp and I Pennsylvania. And I said, well, I just kicked the shit out of Alvin Blue Lewis, who you were supposed to fight next. So what about you and I getting it on? And he said, Jack, come on, let's go in this room over here. So we went in this dressing room and all the press were there because they were there interviewing him for what his next fight was going to be. And we're kicking the door and punching the door and screaming and yelling at each other. They thought we were in there killing each other. And that's the way Ali was. And so he opened the door laughing like hell. We come out, and we sit down, and he says to me, if I give you a fight, will you really try and beat me? I said, I'm going to tell you something. For the first time in my career, I will go to camp like you guys do and lock myself up for 6 months, 6 weeks. I said, and when you come in the ring, son, bring a gun with you because you're going to need it. And he said, 2 steaks, please. But we were supposed to fight another time in Australia, and he fought Joe Bugner instead. And 4 times we were supposed to fight. It just never happened. But I liked Ali a lot. He was very clever. He was very smart, and he made a lot of money. He was a clever guy. He fought Spinks. When he lost to Spinks, I went down and saw him. I said, how the hell do you lose to this guy? And he said, Jack, listen, I was the actor, the producer, and the director. He wanted to win the title 4 times. He was the first guy to ever do that. He said, so he went back and beat the shit out of him and took his title back. That was his plan. He had his Naparanda already done. He used to make me laugh. He was and he got all that stuff from Gorgeous George, a wrestler. Gorgeous George told him one time, he said, listen, man, he said, talk all your shit, rabbit on people. He said, 50% of the crowd will come to hate you. 50% will love you, but you got 100% of the crowd. They'll all come to watch you fight. And he was right on the money. So Ali used to talk all that rabbit. But when you talk to him one-on-one, he was one of the nicest guys you ever met in your life. And very smart, very clever guy. He got jerked around when they took 3 years of his life away. He was owned by a white group in Louisville. And they took very good care of him. Drove a Cadillac. He was. Then he turned around. He made the first mistake he ever made was that his contract was up, and instead of the white group going in and grabbing it and renewing it, the Muslims from Chicago came down and grabbed it and took over his contract. And the government turned around and said that what the white group did. They had him under contract. He was what you call 1Y. He couldn't be drafted. In those days, if you got married or something, you were ineligible for draft. You were like what they classified you 1Y. And they took it, erased it, and made him 1A, which made him that they could draft him. And he was now the Army came after him. So he went to Chicago and he said, "What are you worried about? I'll be like Joe Louis. I can go. I won't go out of the country. I can fight exhibitions. I can box. No problem." And they said, sunshine. You go in the Army, we'll shoot you from behind to make an example. They had just killed Malcolm X, so they scared the hell out of him. And he lost 3 years of his life, which was very sad. That was his prime, And it's been a pleasure, my friend, really. It's good.
Very much
I hope
so.
I didn't tell you anything that scared you or anything like that.
No, I tell you what, I've faced some things in my life. I figure if I'm still here, God's got me here for a reason. So
It's like I tell people, there's no bullet with my name on it yet.
Right.
When I wrote the book, people said to me, "Aren't you afraid somebody?" I said, "Son, if you had tried, if you had died, I'm still sitting here talking to you." We'll be in Orlando, 19th to the 21st of August.
Okay. Do you have any like websites or social media?
It's Phantasma. I'll send it to you. I'll send it to your email.
Okay. If you could send me any links that you want me to share, I could.
Yeah, it's on Facebook. They're promoting the hell out of it. It's actually that's great because they're going to see a lot of horror people that we're going to get to when we do Red River, the horror picture, then we're going to have them endorse it,
Okay.
Which helps out when you got, because some of these horror guys, man, they got 15 million people follow them around the world.
Oh, I believe it. I believe it.
It's, and these little pictures make a fortune.
Oh
You're
yeah.
amazed the amount of money that these guys make. The trip. Freddy Krueger,
Oh yeah. I know
never have
he's
to
got
work
a
another day in
following.
his life.
Oh,
He's
that's right.
set for life, man.
So when you come into Austin,
I'll come down and see you. We'll come in the studio and sit down and do a show.
oh, that would be nice. That
Yeah,
would
be
be
my
awesome.
pleasure. Be my pleasure.
Mr. Halloran, I really
Jack,
appreciate you.
please.
Oh, thank you, Jack. Thank you so much for spending your time with me. And I was pleasantly surprised at the history lesson I got today. I wasn't expecting that, but that made it very interesting. I really appreciate it. And
Hey, it's my pleasure.
you're
I'll
always
send you-
welcome back.
I'll send you a copy of the book, the manuscript, the original manuscript. You'll like it.
Oh, thank you. Thank you.
You take care, Kyle. Be well.
You too. And I also want to thank all of you out there. If you are new to the channel, thank you for stopping by. Please subscribe. For those of you who are regular to the channel, thank you for your support. And until the next one, everyone, please take care. Be kind to one another. God bless and peace.
We hope you enjoyed this episode of Listen to the Vibes. You can catch us on Buzzsprout or wherever you listen to your favourite podcasts, and on YouTube. Follow us on Facebook at The Vibes Broadcast Network